Hey, Low Code Approach listeners, this is Wendy Haddad. Before we jump into this week's episode, I wanted to let you know that we are starting to plan for the next season, and we want to make sure we hear from you on what is most important and relevant in terms of the topics that we'll be choosing. So if you could open a web browser and pop over to aka.ms/low code topic request, that's aka.ms/low code topic request, all one word. Fill out that brief survey on what topics and what subjects, what guests you might want to hear from. And who knows, maybe it'll make it into the next season of the podcast. Thanks so much and happy listening.
Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of the Low Code Approach. I am Sean Feeney, a Senior Product Marketing Manager on the Power Platform team, and I'm joined by...
I'm Wendy Haddad. I'm a Senior Cloud Solution Architect, Delivery Lead, and a former Microsoft customer, and I am joined by...
Officially, Ken Aguilar, Principal Program Manager, with a selfish ask. Power Platform Community Conference is coming up, and we once again have the Admin Workshop happening this year. Please sign up, join us, and... maybe ping me on LinkedIn and provide, some feedback and say, hey, here's what I want to learn, here's what I want to know, and so on. Back to you, Sean and Wendy.
Surprise infomercial.
Yeah, your plug quota has been met for the day. But speaking of plugins, we have a very special guest, Gwen Bego. And Gwen, as we affectionately call him, is the GPM for AI Builder. How you doing, Gwen?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Sean, for asking.
Gwen, it's so good to have you on. And we don't talk about AI Builder as much, but I feel like it's integrated into so many of our products, especially Copilot Studio. So can you talk a little bit about some of the advancements that we're making and the problem that we're solving with this integration?
Yeah, I think this is part of big news that we announced at Build is now we have direct integration of AI Builder and specifically a tool that sort of in-house we call our Prompt Builder, which is directly available now in Copilot Studio. And what it does, it gives you the ability to craft specific AI actions. So if you want your Copilot, for example, to perform a very specific given task, or if you want it to output a very specific type of content, what you can do is you can craft a specific instruction in natural language in the form of a prompt to better help your Copilot understand what you want it to do. So essentially, there is a new interface in Copilot Studio that allows you to do that. Build these AI actions using natural language that will help guide your Copilot in answering the way you want to specific customer questions.
Yeah, it's super slick. And I mean, I'm on the product marketing team, so I get to see a lot of the great demos. And Gwen built out this fabulous demo showing off all the functionality in there. And so, you mentioned you want to bring in data into these prompts that you're building. And in the demo that you showed off, it was Dataverse that was used in there, and it's a great example of kind of like hotel registration, if you will, right? But one of the really cool parts that you put in there were some of the filters that you applied to the data that was being returned. Can you talk a little bit more about the customization when you start including data from like Dataverse sources into your prompts to help build out a more customized prompt plugin?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you are setting up your Copilot, you now have the ability to configure knowledge sources. This will allow your Copilot to have extended knowledge, not just general knowledge, but enterprise-specific knowledge. And so through that knowledge hub, you can add different types of knowledge sources, for example, a SharePoint library or a set of Dataverse records. But in some cases, that's not sufficient to allow you to have a very precise answer. Or in some cases, you want to guide the Copilot to say, well, for these types of user questions, for example, look at this specific data. So what you can do with the prompt builder is you can reference specific, for example, Dataverse tables, specific Dataverse records. You can filter them out to specific value. So let's say, for example, that, you want your Copilot to identify, what is the next best action for like a customer service request that's incoming. What you can do is you can, for example, specifically say, build a prompt-based instruction. And in that instruction, you can say, for example, when you have this type of customer request, look at the specific data in this Dataverse customer table, filter it down to this type of attribute. And so that really allows you to kind of guide the Copilot to provide a very specific request. And sometimes it's what makes the difference between a kind of a generic response to like an actual response that will really solve the customer problem. But yeah, you're absolutely right that the key point is around adding data and your own enterprise knowledge to the Copilot so that the Copilot's able to operate on a specific enterprise process. And so that's one of the key value props I think of the prompt builder, is allowing you to tweak, for now with Dataverse data, which specific data to access to solve a specific type of problem.
So it sounds like, unlike Hotel California, you're not actually stuck. So let me maybe ask, what are some of the more effective patterns and practices that you've seen that customers may be interested in saying that are repeatable for creating effective prompts with Copilot?
Yeah, for sure. So, these are kind of general principles of prompt engineering, but a prompt can get pretty complex. It's interesting as we're seeing, how customers are starting to use these tools. In some cases, they're building a really advanced set of instructions. And essentially, I think the more specific you make the instruction, the better results will be. And so we actually created a prompt engineering guide with some general principles. If you want to go kind of check that out after to follow up, the link is aka.ms/prompt guide. And then you'll see there's a whole bunch of kind of recommendations in there. But at a high level, I think what you want to kind of split your prompt into specific types of instructions. So first you want to kind of describe the task. Let's say you want the Copilot to output, let's say, a product feedback summary. So you're going to be creating a product feedback prompt, which is essentially an AI action. That way, the next time when the user of the Copilot is going to say, hey, give me a product feedback summary for my product, instead of having it be kind of a generic Copilot answer, it's going to be triggering that custom prompt instruction that you previously created, and it's going to give you a very, very specific answer. And so the way to construct your prompt is you define the task, like create a product feedback summary. You have to set the context. So you're going to be guiding your Copilot and say, well, base the feedback on these specific customer reviews that came in. And so, for example, you can point it to the specific Dataverse tables, where those reviews are located. Then you want to set expectations, like when you're building a summary, for example, identify the key themes, judge the overall sentiment, highlight any kind of recurring issues or praises that come up. So you're kind of setting expectations for what you want the Copilot to do. And then you want to be specific in defining the output. So what should the Copilot produce? Like format the summary in a very specific way, be concise, present the information clearly, set maybe like who the output is for. Like maybe, will it be a marketing team? Will it be a sales team? And so the more specific you get in terms of describing the specific things you want, who it's for, what is the context, what is the knowledge, what is the expectations, you'll see that the results will be widely improved in terms of the response that Copilot is going to give. And I think the other key point is that this is kind of a iterative process for the maker. So a key point about using prompts and kind of configuring your Copilots in general is that you want to kind of try out things and see how the Copilot responds. Kind of like how you're building an app, you can just kind of craft and construct your Copilot and test out different types of answers and build out kind of specific strategies for how you instruct Copilot to do things. It's pretty straightforward. It's kind of like how you communicate with a human in a sense, in terms of what you want. You just express it in natural language, but you have to be precise and you have to be specific, and that makes the response a lot better.
Gwen, I want to maybe redefine or clarify some things that you're saying, because this is really helpful. But working with customers, we overuse sometimes the word Copilot, and then now we're using the word prompts. Yeah. So I think I heard the answer, but I just want to repeat it for the audience sake here. When you say prompts, are you talking about when an end user chats with M365, or are these prompts that are like special instructions that we're giving Copilot Studio? Can you elaborate there a little bit?
Yes, it's a great point, because you can use the term kind of loosely to mean different things. And so, in the context of Gen AI, a prompt is just the instruction that you send to the underlying AI model to perform a specific task. So when a user is, chatting, for example, with a Copilot, in a sense, that is also a prompt. Sometimes we distinguish and we say like it's a user utterance. It's like the user question. But what we can do, kind of in the background, is to better answer that type of question, we can craft a kind of a custom instruction to answer that user utterance. And that, in terms of like engineering terms, that is also referred to as a prompt. So think of it as like, essentially you can create an AI-powered action that's going to push the Copilot to respond in a specific way, so that the user prompt or the user utterance will have kind of a specific instruction associated to it. But it's a great point that sometimes, we confuse the user prompt with kind of maybe you could say the maker prompt, which is essentially like the set of instructions that the maker will be giving to the copilot, to behave in a specific way. So yeah, when we talk about kind of prompts and authoring prompts in the context of Copilot Studio, I think we refer more to the maker prompt side of things. So the set of natural instructions that the maker is giving to the copilot so that when the user asks a question, the copilot will, respond in a more specific way.
I'm going to get a little bit more into the weeds here,
Okay.
because I think these are questions customers are asking. So is it being appended to your prompt? So I'm a user, I asked a question, you put like a bunch of prompt instructions or additional information, and that goes to the LLM? Or are these just instructions to the bot that's completely separate, not going to the large language model about how we respond?
Yeah, so now we're gonna getting into the specifics, but it's interesting. The way it works is that there's different ways then that you can trigger these custom instructions, right? So either you create your prompt-based instruction, you associate it to a copilot, and then the copilot kind of figures it out, sort of when to trigger this specific instruction. Let's say, for example, I've created a maker prompt. Let's take the example I was using before, like create a project summary. Copilot will figure out that if the user then is asking the Copilot, summarize my project status for today, instead of using the default knowledge of the Copilot, it's going to override and use the specific instruction. So what happens in the background is we're just overriding the call to the Copilot and using the specific instruction instead. So that's kind of one way of doing it. There's another way of doing it. As you may have seen in Copilot Studio, you can go even further and be really specific and create kind of a conversation topics. And so you can also force the Copilot to trigger, that specific maker prompt, that specific instruction, for specific types of user questions. To kind of go back to the question, what it does essentially is it just overrides the default behavior. It uses all of the instructions that you configured in the prompt, and it sends that as a request, to the GPT model, which is the reasoning engine behind the Copilot. And so another interesting thing is, like, if you add references to data in your prompt, same thing, it's going to grab that specific data and it's going to include it as part of the prompt instruction. So all of those things comprise the instruction. And so there's kind of lots of things in the instruction. There's the user question, there's the specific instruction maybe that the maker crafted, there's data references, there's some also kind of system prompts to ensure that that the Copilot will behave appropriately and won't produce kind of inappropriate content. So yeah, all those things kind of combine form the full set of instructions that are used by the Copilot to produce the best response.
I was just about to ask you about the system prompts and how we are inserting responsible AI here and not building Skynet or those instructions there. And I know, Ken, you probably have things to add, but we've been talking about how much we're providing visibility to admins, but I wonder if there's visibility into some of these prompts. I'm not sure if that's a question for Gwen or Ken. There's a little bit of a rhyme there, but how we're actually helping govern there.
Let me comment just quickly before Gwen chimes in on that one. So it's absolutely, I think, a concern for customers, and especially when we start talking about security, governance, and so on, right, in the realm of responsible AI and folks trying to perhaps circumvent policies, controls, and things along those lines by creating very creative bots. However, for folks who may or may not have tuned into some of the announcements that we just recently announced at Build, we do have a new feature coming, and it's called Copilot Hub. So Copilot Hub, all of the goodness that Gwen and team are building and providing, the prompts and whatnot, are lack of a better way to the term, not to say this and not trying to get into the weeds and make this a Copilot Hub episode. We monitor the prompts and the behaviors, the interaction, and ensure that there is ethical behavior, ethical questions and prompts and so on going on with the copilots. And where there isn't, we also alert the admin and say, oh, hey, this is something you might want to look into. So I will see if I can find the BRK for that from Build and link it in the show notes. I will try to do my best to find that.
I think it's kind of great call out, Ken. And then I think within the actual product engineering, I think in the different layers, there's different techniques that are built in, to ensure that Copilot respects appropriate guidelines so that it doesn't, produce any sort of inappropriate content. And so there's guardrails set up at the service level. You end up kind of calling a GPT instance that is, hosted in Azure's OpenAI service. So there's security guardrails that are set up there. Within the prompt builder itself, there's system prompts as well that ensure that provides appropriate content. So, I won't kind of get into the uber specifics, but like this is a core part of how we build out the features, and we actively, test and ensure that there's appropriate content moderation. We test for wide range of specific guidelines. So this is really a core part of our engineering process is making sure that the Copilot behaves responsibly and produces, content that's appropriate.
So we've talked a little bit about the security and the responsible AI. What about analytics? And how do I know if there is a well-performing prompt? Or how do I know if my prompt is actually performing well in the copilots that I've inserted that prompt into? How do I know more about that?
So for each Copilot, there's an analytics tab in Copilot Studio that you can reference that gives you some metrics in terms of how your Copilot is performing. So for example, you have a customer satisfaction score, you have an engagement score. In some cases, your users will be prompted, with a survey where they can, provide input in terms of their specific satisfaction when using the Copilot. So kind of all those engagement signals, and I would say maybe qualitative signals that users give, you can find those in the analytics tab for each of your Copilot. So then as a user, you can kind of monitor, for, let's say, for specific conversations where you've set up, a maker prompt with those specific instructions, you can check if that's kind of behaving or generating increased customer satisfaction, increased customer engagement, compared to a kind of a more generic implementation of your Copilot. So that's generally what I would recommend is looking at in Copilot Studio, the specific analytics. And, it shows you, depending on the types of themes of the user queries, what is the user satisfaction percentage, the engagement score. And so you can track the evolution of how your users are satisfied with your Copilot.
Gwen, I'm curious if you have, I know we just jumped right into the technology and the safety, but what are some use cases that you've seen? And then how are you planning? We just announced it, so it's an unfair question, but how are you planning to further evolve this product?
Super interesting question, broad question, but there's lots of interesting use cases. And I think, Sean, you were referencing this at the start. There's an interesting one, that we use in some of our demos around providing, recommendations for travel destinations. That's a very sort of specific use case, but lots of cases, I think, around customer support. For example, when you have a customer case kind of coming in, you want to craft a specific instruction, maybe to classify the case, analyze the sentiment. And using these maker prompts, you can ensure that kind of Copilot maps to your unique enterprise classification and produces the output you want. There's lots of use cases that we're seeing around also, I would say maybe project management. We have some interesting use cases with some of our customers where they're using prompts to kind of, generate status reports, for specific project tracking, generate maybe like a risk analysis, SWOT analysis. And so again, those are the types of things where you want the Copilot to produce something very specific, like you have an output that maps to a company process. And so you really want to guide Copilot to answer in that specific way. There's, also in terms of maybe sales, marketing, we've seen customers use this to, for example, generate specific quotes, for incoming customer requests. So again, you can kind of automate that sort of first step response of the customer wants to have an inquiry about some of your products and services. And again, you can guide the Copilot to say, hey, look at this specific data for this type of request and, output a quote in this specific type of format. So that's one coming in. There's cases also around HR and operations to kind of facilitate customer onboarding where you can, help automate that sort of first process of analyzing types of onboarding documents and then providing specific instructions to new users. So, lots of use cases. And that's kind of the beauty of this thing as well is that, all of these kind of content generation prompts, they can apply to, basically any industry, any department. And so I'm sure we'll be seeing kind of lots more across the board, but those are the few of the cases that we've seen. And then in terms of direction, I would say, it's interesting. I think right before Build, OpenAI announced kind of their new flagship model, GPT-4o. And that has a bunch of kind of new interesting improvements. I think maybe one of the biggest ones, or one of the more disruptive ones, on top of supporting advanced text generation capabilities, it is now multimodal. So it supports different types of inputs, and it can generate different types of outputs. So you're not just generating text, but you can generate an image, a full-on document, upcoming audio, video. So I think this is where we're headed. I think directionally, with these prompts, is that we're progressively going to move to being able to, have, not only text as kind of input and not only generating text as an output, but, these different types of inputs and outputs. So that's definitely one direction that we're heading into. And I think the other big one is really, focusing on enterprise knowledge, really, and ensuring that you can augment the Copilot with your specific enterprise knowledge bases. So extending the set of knowledge bases, giving you additional kind of tools so that you can, filter the right data, extend to the right data types. So I think that is also kind of really top of mind for us, is making sure that, essentially that the Copilot can know, how your enterprise works. So to answer and operate effectively on these company processes, Copilot needs some of that data. So giving, the makers the right tools so that they can really add enterprise data to the Copilot's knowledge, that's also a big focus in the future.
So Gwen, this all sounds really good, but the real question is, how much does this cost? What's the licensing model here, and where do we go to learn more information about that?
Yeah, so that's also one of the changes that's been done at Build, is that we've streamlined the prompt licensing, with the Copilot licensing. So now when you use your prompts in the context of a Copilot, you don't have to acquire kind of separate licenses. We license prompts through the Copilot messages. So in the context of Copilots, it is kind of one licensing system. And you can go to the Power Platform licensing guide to see all those details.
And do we have in that licensing guide a definition of what that means in the context of a Copilot for people who are new?
Yes, I think in there you can see all of the different, for AI Builder, all of the different capabilities that are there. I assume there's the specifics around how the different types of capabilities are used across the different surface areas. And then for Copilot use specifically, you'll find sections there that detail that licensing is done through the Copilot messages.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sweet. Well, Gwen, there's some amazing stuff that we announced at Build, amazing stuff coming down the pipe for prompt building and for Copilot integration and everything down the road. If our users are listening to this and saying, man, how do I get into this? How do I start, generating prompts? You provided us the AKA for the prompt guide. We'll have that in the show notes for people to get into. Is there anything else that you think would help people when they start working with building new prompts, and what will assist them in building out the best prompts?
Yeah, there's definitely pretty extensive learning material. So, learning documentation. There's also demo videos. I know Dwayne, one of the Copilot product managers, does some amazing kind of on-hands demo videos as well. We'll need to check to make sure that we have the right prompt videos there, but I'm sure there's already a couple. So I think a combination of kind of YouTube and those sort of learning videos that are there that sort of help you get started. The learning documentation, which we take a lot of time to kind of ensure that it describes all the different steps that you can make, and then, head over to Copilot Studio and try it for yourself. When you're in Copilot Studio, it's front and center now when you're either creating a new Copilot extension or when you're in a conversation topic. There's a reference where you can say add an action, and then behind that action, you can set it up a specific prompt. So yeah, I would recommend to just go to Copilot Studio and trying out with those support materials there. And I hope that's the great way to get started.
Very, very cool. We look forward to having you back on at Ignite timeframe.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'll come back for sure. With pleasure.
No, it's going to be great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gwen. We really appreciate it. And we will chat with you pretty soon.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for your time. And looking forward to more discussions in the future. Thank you.